you need solitary time to be with yourself and your own thoughts. And you really do need time to do that without other people around in the project. The best work will come from people being able to come to conclusions individually and then share them collectively.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Cut to Reveal. I'm Ricky and I'm here with my host Peter. Peter, how are you doing?
Yeah, doing well. Can't complain. Better than I deserve. So today's episode will be an interview with the author of the book that we made a video about. So we made a video about the book Documentary Editing Principles and Practice. And today we talked to Jacob Bricca, who wrote the book and who works in a film school in Arizona. And he's a very knowledgeable person, and we enjoyed talking to him. And also, we lost the track of time, so this is a long interview, but in a good sense. We lost the track of time because the conversation was so engaging to us, I think.
Yeah, for sure. We got to talk about the nature of jump cuts, just the mindset of documentary editors,
and also like transitions, for example, right? So that was a big for me. That's something I wanted to know, because once I worked on a short documentary a few years ago, that's something I really struggled with, like how to transition from one topic to the other. And he talks about this concept of hinge clips in his book. So that's what we touch on, but he also gives some examples of these things and what is his approach when he's looking for transitions. So I think these are very, very valuable tips, that are spread across the conversation that you will enjoy.
Yeah, it's very interesting talking with Jacob, who's so accomplished and so knowledgeable, considering that he's a professor of the art. So let's roll the tape.
Let's roll the tape. How did you actually become an editor?
As a child, I really loved radio. I was an avid radio listener, and to me, the idea of just the seg, the transition from one song to another was just something that was endlessly exciting to me. Just how one song would come on, and it would come on at just the moment where it would cut the other one off. The other one would kind of fade in the background, and so I was really interested in music and in radio before I was interested in anything else. And somehow, in some strange way, I think that has something to do with my interest in editing. By the time I was later in high school, I was definitely sort of interested in film and such. But it was something about that idea of the transition was fascinating to me. And I would even, all the technology we had when I was 12 and really into this was just a single record player, right? One of those kind where it like a little auto thing where you've got 4 discs stacked there and then another one will plop on as it's ready to. And so I had only, in order to be a DJ, I had to do it entirely in my head. So I would go from playing one record and then in my head I would okay, here's where the transition starts, and I'd take the needle off, and then I would put the next record on and I'd put the needle back on, and in my head I would have perfect a perfect seg. I didn't really come around to deciding to be an editor per se until a lot later. I got introduced to documentary filmmaking in college, and started making my own documentaries after college, and was definitely into filmmaking. But it was about 3 years after finishing college that I made a decision to go to the American Film Institute and to apply for their editing program. So it was sort of that choice of what do I want to do if I do some kind of a graduate program, that sort of forced me into thinking about, there's that editing could actually be a career. Strange, but I was 25 before that ever settled into place. It was that's a thing that one could do, Of course, I had already edited my own things, but sort of that identity because there is an editor's identity, I think, and sort of a pride in process and a pride in work, that really came about in my mid-20s as I started to learn about it. And then kind of since then, I think I've always thought of myself as an editor.
Awesome. And how did you, got into documentary editing specifically?
As I said, I took a fantastic class in college at Wesleyan University in Connecticut called Documentary Realism. With a professor named Jonathan Mednick, who passed away many years ago, unfortunately. and it was, I of course had seen documentaries before, but in terms of getting a real education in their history and thinking about them and starting to sort of practice, that was something that was pretty formative. Just getting to see a lot of work and to be around someone who could really teach me, and really just the idea of working with fragments of real life in order to create a statement or to say something about the world, to investigate the world by being in it. It's always the way that. It's funny. I've just never really thought in fiction terms. I enjoy fiction. I read novels. I enjoy fiction movies. I just don't. That's not the way that I create. I've always feel like I've created more by just through in the nonfiction realm. So it was in college that I got interested in documentaries, and then just was lucky to get to be around other people who are in that world, especially starting around actually really right after college. There was a pretty thriving documentary scene in the San Francisco area. I started meeting people there, and then there are quite a few documentary filmmakers in Los Angeles, and that's where I moved to go to grad school, and just kind of started getting involved with other people and doing projects where I was mostly the editor.
The trajectory of your film journey or film editing journey, was it just continuous, or between the end of college and then graduate school, did you have like a break where you did some other stuff, or more like edited films and whatnot?
I really, the prime thing out of college for me was I want to make documentaries. I hadn't come to the idea that I was specializing. And so I got a job doing video services, essentially like a corporate video job, in the San Francisco area for a technology research company. So sort of a Silicon Valley type outfit. And that was fine with me because at the time, technology was still expensive-ish, and just having access to tools was a huge. There were systems like Media 100, and there was stuff happening with nonlinear editing systems, but it was still a clunky and not. Avid existed, but those were $20,000 plus. And so just having access to tools was really was a great side benefit of any gig, and that's. That was sort of what I wanted to do. And so, I found myself always, regardless of whatever job I had, money-making job, I was just making stuff. So these tended to be short documentaries on one thing or another. I was really, I liked working with found footage. I liked doing sort of media criticism type things. That was sort of, and I had seen this film actually in high school, even before I got to college, called Koyana Scazzi, from Godfrey Reggio, which was really the one film that ever just truly blew my mind. I was really never the same after I saw that movie. And if you look at my filmmaking for like the decade after I saw that, when I was 16, I feel like I was trying to remake Koyana Scazzi again and again and again in my own way. So that played a huge role in my imagination about what documentary could be about, and just sort of pure juxtaposition. It's a film that is just fragments of the real world, mostly with some kind of time lapse or photography, but set to a music score with occasional sound embellishments. But it's really just sort of images in juxtaposition with each other.
Yeah, I've seen it.
Yeah,
I've seen it. I remember actually seeing it for the first time as well. I was into photography for a long time, so I was looking into that more from my photography point of view by that time. But I was very impressed by that, by what they could accomplish with, as you said, juxtaposition of images, which is basically editing.
Yeah. Where did you grow up?
Oh, I'm from Poland, so I haven't had actually any experience with editing since I was 20, I don't know, 5 or something like that. Basically, I was supposed to be a civil engineer, so my story is a little bit different. I'm like, there was just a point in my life that I just realized that, oh no, actually my passion is into things that are more related to art and visual art specifically. And even though I was quite good, not to brag, but I was quite good at at math and physics and chemistry and all this stuff. I just decided to just put it away and focus on what gives me pleasure, so to speak.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you about embracing unexpected, because that's one of the I think principles you've mentioned in your book at the very beginning, and that's the one that I hear people talking about from time to time, both editors and directors as well. I wanted to ask you if you have specific examples of embracing unexpected from your career.
When you ask about that, and when we talk about this, what immediately comes to mind is an old friend and someone who I have edited his work before, named Matthew Bazell, a director. I edited his film Luna, about the rock band Luna. I edited a film of his called Jimmy Scott, If You Only Knew. Tell Me Do You Miss Me is the name of the Luna film. And when we would sit down to edit, I would be in the editor's chair and he would be sitting beside me and we'd be going through things. And it was so common that we'd be playing things and he would just see an accidental thing that I had done, right? I was on the way to getting to the thing that I wanted to show him. And he said, "What's that? What's that? What's that? Wait, you just did, that was amazing." And so he loved this idea of he just loved these accidental moments that would result, and that I found really fun working with him because too much of that and you get sidetracked, but nonetheless there were things that really came out of that were just and his spirit of it was very much like, here we are, we don't know what's going to happen, anything could happen. It's simply editing is such an intellectually demanding task where even if you do all of the right work of organizing your whole project and keeping things tidy and having places where things go, nonetheless you are basically holding a lot of variables in your brain at any one time. You're always trying to think about what an arrangement is and what it could be. And it's that flexibility of thinking that something seems to have a solidity in the way that it is, and then thinking this could be different. This could be, what if this, what if that? And so I think it's about trying to keep a balance between the thrust that says we need order, we need to take the chaos and buff the hard edges off of it. We need to put everything into a very coherent space where there's no confusion, there's really no chaos. And yet you can really, if you go too far in that direction, you can kind of take the life out of something. There's a quote in my book from Mary Lampson, who says, "I've seen films really get lost in the finishing stages, where you have something that has so much life to it. There has a true unpredictability, right? And then as you try to get towards a more perfect finished version, you can rough all those edges off it so much that you end up with something that no longer surprises it, no longer. And so it's something about that dynamic that to remember that there is that sweet spot in between those things.
That's a great point. Love it. I'm also thinking about the organizational aspect, the importance of organization and prep work, basically, all the things you do before you actually cut the story together. Can you talk a little bit more about that? What's your approach to organizing assets and select reels?
I started doing this. It's so interesting. Writing the book, Documentary Editing Principles and Practice, was a process for me that gave me a reason to reach out to other editors. Of course, I'm already in a community of editors, but having a book to write is a great excuse to call people up and to chat with them and to really go, how do you do things? How do you do it? And so for me, it was a process sort of discovery and realizing that things that I was doing were actually very much common, and that no two editors necessarily do it the same way. Mm-hmm. But I think that process of select reels, which is one of those things, is a real constant, and it's. But I started doing it because I felt like I had no other choice. Like I felt like, well, I don't know what the hell to do with this stuff, so I can at least take this first step, and I can just sort of watch things down and see maybe what I can get rid of. Maybe I can. It felt like a necessary step because I couldn't figure anything else out that was better. I've come to think of it more as it is that, but it's that by necessity, and it's actually like a really productive, important part of the process. I think it's just so I've always thought of it also as a process of sifting, where again, you've got these massive numbers of variables of what footage could be used, what way could it be used in, what are and even just like, what is here, like what is in this material, and you really don't get there until you start trying to build things into chunks and patterns and sort of start to see ideas just by putting things together in the same reel. It's a way that you can preview things for yourself, where if you look at a bunch of clips in one context, they start to seem to have new possible meanings than if you look at them, the same clips, but they're like those same clips might be used in a different reel, and different things come out of them. So it's really about thinking about the contextual meaning of everything by sorting it and by grouping it and by sifting it. So there's really, I don't know that there's really a wrong way to do it, except one that has not enough rigor to it. But people come up with, I love looking at other people's select reels on projects, because you get the craziest titles. you get a title of a select reel that would mean nothing to anybody except for that editor and that, whatever the team is that's sitting in that room. But that doesn't matter as long as it means something to them, as long as it's got something, and some of them are fairly obvious, but some of them are really like left field ideas, like there can be a bucket for that. Let's stick it over there so that we watch those down together, and then, there's just the fact that once you do start thinning things out, then I think your perceptual abilities get much more focused. They get much greater. So if you're looking at, let's just pick a number, like 8 hours worth of footage, it's really hard to, there's only so much you're going to be able to do with that. Once you've got something down to, say, 2 hours of footage, you can really start having more sophisticated ideas, better ideas about where things might go from there. Once you've removed the things that, at least for sake of argument, are probably not going to, you've decided maybe they don't have value, or they're going to have value just over here, and not over there. Mm-hmm. So,
do you sometimes use like the same clip basically in a few of the select reels?
Yes. To me, it's the first level of importance is that everything has at least one place to go. So, and again, it's that, I think this is part of an editor's mindset, is sort of that, it's that process-oriented, anal-retentive thing that says, we've done it. We've been through it all, right? Everything's been cataloged. It all has a home, right? It's got some. Mm-hmm. So to me, that simply means that I have looked at everything that's there, and I have either decided to, at least provisionally discard it by not putting it in a select reel, or I have put it somewhere. There it is. Then I can make that whole first pass of all the footage, and now everything is either in a select reel or it's been left in the raw footage. And of course we could go find it again, but for now we're going to sort of move on. And then the next time I'm looking at everything, I'm just looking at those reels. All I'm doing is looking at those select reels. So it's like It's just a different way to look at the raw footage. And yes, once I do that, then I start making, those are like source-based select reels. They in general, they're grouped because of how it was that they were shot. All the stuff from one interview is going to be in a select reel. All the stuff that was shot in a particular verite shoot is going to be in that reel. But at that point, when you start going through those source-based select reels, you start having ideas that are possibly, multiple, and you start creating topic-based select reels where there's sort of another layer on top of that, where I'm taking something from 5 different select reels and it goes in a new topic-based select reel where I'm kind of seeing ideas play out and I can think of them that way. The technology element is interesting here because Final Cut X, if one tries to, if a lot of editors don't even want to go there, I think understandably. But if you are, there was a film on which we decided to use Final Cut X because of certain capabilities it had with nesting subtitles. And I found that it was a pretty amazing tool. And in that tool, it really is guiding you very strongly towards
keywords.
Yes, exactly. Keywording. Yeah.
Keywording.
It really wants you to use keywords. It's everything is based around. So it's Final Cut X really works. It's more like it's a database. It has these database potentials so that every piece of footage very easily can be in various places at once with keywords, and you can select a subset of something, and that becomes a keyworded part, and that really has pretty powerful capabilities. I haven't always been able to use it even in Final Cut X. I still find myself doing some pretty traditional select reels with little title cards in a sequence, and yet in other times I really have been able to use that where it's because of the keywording, which is actually a pretty simple idea. It's not a really complicated thing.
Yeah.
But it isn't the way that Avid works, and it's not the way that Premiere works,
Yeah, I've heard a lot about it. I talked about it with a few editors who use it, and I think this concept is brilliant. I mean, much more convenient, I guess, than the traditional way. At least in some cases, definitely much more convenient.
It can be. I mean, it when I first started using it, I felt very uncomfortable because you had to work really hard to get it to behave like another the systems that we would be more used to, where everything just has one home, right? Everything is in a bin somewhere, and that's where it lives. Like, it's not really the way it works. Everything is just there's different views of subsets of the whole. That's all that Final Cut does, and so you kind of have to change the way you change your expectations about how you're going to mentally understand where footage is. But I think it's a useful exercise to go through. I found it very exciting to work there, and I have actually chosen to use it on projects in the past.
So, do you find that the project dictates what tool you use? I guess what editing software you're using? And then also, to go back to before when you start branching out into these different ideas, are you just seeing those organically, or are you, when you said you were editing the Luna documentary with the director being right at your side, is that more of like them being like, hey, think about this, or how is that all coming together when you're sitting down?
Well, let me answer the second one first. So when Matthew and I were sitting down, in general, I think most projects work in some version of this where there's usually a lot of work that has to get done by the editor that doesn't really require the director to be there. And I mean, things are so different now, for a lot of people, remote work is the norm at this point, and that's just and editing quote unquote together may be like a Zoom session or something these days, but or some other software that enables that. But in general, the project starts off with these very okay, I'm gonna have 2 or 3 days to get this done, and then we'll get together and we'll work on these things. So it's these sort of targeted sets of time, and by the end, you're really looking at the final thing down, everybody's all there, just trying to hammer out different ideas. What if we did it this way? What if we, just playing around with different sequences? We're both in the room. And that's something that really is afforded especially by in-person work. I think there is, for as much as my own career has benefited from the ability to work remotely, because almost all of my work in the past decade and a half has been remote. Mm-hmm. I do think that there is something lost by not being in the same room together. I think there's, if nothing else other than just an intimacy with the other person, which itself can facilitate better work. And in terms of the tool dictating the work, very specifically, this was a film called Marriage Cops, which is still, I worked on it for a while. It had to go on hiatus. It's being worked on in a different capacity now. But it was shot entirely in India, and so not in a language that either I nor one of the co-directors understood hardly at all. Mm-hmm. The other one understood it fluently, and yet I was the editor, and the other co-director, didn't. So essentially, we needed to be able to watch the footage subtitled. We needed to be able to, and at the time at least, and this was probably 5 years ago, we did a lot of research, and neither in Premiere nor in Avid was there a really good solution for doing this. Whereas in Final Cut X, there's a way that you could nest things where you really could create a subtitled version of something, watch it subtitled, and then make a cut from the source to the sequence that would then include by the nesting, it would include those subtitles, which could then be broken out into their original form and then adjusted. So that was one project where that was the reason why we chose Final Cut X. There wasn't any other reason. It was just for our need to be able to just watch subtitled versions of things. In general, I think these days, Avid and Premiere, they work I have my own, likes and dislikes of different parts of each of them, but they are very, very similar tools. And I actually, again, into a Final Cut X plug, the one system that has ever truly made me feel like, wow, this is kind of faster was Final Cut X. Even though it also has some, there are things that there are ways in which, Apple just loves to simplify. And in some cases, they just do that to such a strong extent that there are capabilities that don't exist in that program that you really wish that they would. So no, I don't think any one of them is necessarily always, perfect. But
how do you find your editing, documentary editing jobs? Do they find you or do you find them?
This is not an original answer by any means, but it's all about relationships. It's all about contacts, etc. And I think that's built through various ways. Sometimes undergraduate students who are thinking of graduate school are asking me, do I need to go to grad school or whatever? And I always think of it as there are great things about it. You don't necessarily need to do it in order to get a job. But any situation you're in is going to afford you opportunities to make relationships with people. So, for instance, there are people who I went to grad school with who I have now worked for. And that's just because we, in that very intimate context where we're all just working on things in a sort of a feverish, intense way, and with some of the more lofty artistic things top of mind, a little bit of the deadline-driven, budget-driven things, receding a little bit to the background. You develop some really great relationships in that way that are really forged based on artistic similarities, or feeling at home with someone in the way that you mutually see the world from an artistic point of view, or from a style point of view or whatever. So that's a long way of saying that my gigs have come about through lots of various ways, but they've always come about through some kind of relationship or another. The first big film that I edited, and probably the one that was the biggest from a box office point of view than anything I've ever edited, was this film called Lost in La Mancha, which came out in 2002, which was a worldwide phenomenon in theaters. You know, it grossed well over $1 million worldwide. It played in Europe, South America, on TV, everywhere. It was written up in every... And that was like the directors of that film lived across the street from me. That was how we knew each other, you know.
Really?
And it wasn't quite that simple, you know, like the reason why we knew each other is because one of them had been friends with my roommate at Temple University. And so they knew each other prior. They were moving to LA. They stayed with us while they looked for a spot when they were coming to live in LA. They really liked our street. They're like, maybe we can live here. They found a way to rent the place across the street. But I barely knew them at that point. And then we just got to be friends. You know, we took care of each other's cats. We had dinner parties. You know, we got to be, you know, we enjoyed each other's company a lot. And then they had this project, and they of course knew that I was an editor, and they had a pretty decent budget for that, and they had a producer who was really pushing them to find someone with more credits than I had. But they really, you know, we had a good working relationship, right? I mean, we actually had never worked together before, but we had a good relationship, and they knew enough of my work that they were going to vouch for me, and they actually felt better about being with me, who had fewer credits, but they kind of knew me, and they felt like they knew my abilities, and they would want to like spend time hanging out with me working than the people that were being pushed by the producer, who they didn't know, who had all these credits, but what's that going to feel like, you know? So to their credit, and thanks to them, I had that first gig. And I've worked for them at various points since then, you know. And so a lot of the work that I've had are just repeat customers. So I happen to have one experience literally more than 2 decades ago, and then, you know, 15 years later, I get a call. You know, it's not that we haven't been in touch in the meantime, but some combination of that kind of thing has been the case. And so, you know, there's one job that I got on an early film called Beyond the Border, and I went on to edit 5 films for that filmmaking team that I really did just answer an online posts. You know, I think that's the only gig that and that one I speak Spanish relatively well, and that was one of the reasons why I got that gig, because a lot of it was in Spanish. It was shot in Mexico, so that was one thing where there was another little extra skill that really helped. I don't think they would have hired me if I hadn't had that. But that's the one place where, like I just answer, you know, I met them through, I can't remember where they were posting that, but everything else has come through some combination of someone giving my name to someone else and saying this person would be great, or I meet them in one context and then we turn into, you know, work collaborators in another. And that can't be underestimated, the degree to which just personal familiarity and personal comfort can be a big part of a work relationship. So
yeah, choosing someone you want to spend time with, that's wise. That's always wise.
Yeah, and you're gonna have to get to probably some somewhat uncomfortable places where you are not going to agree. You know, like in general, I think really good directors, they want editors who, this is such a complicated dance, but they want editors who have an opinion, right? They don't want a doormat, you know, they don't want somebody who's just going to push the buttons. And on the other hand, you can't really deal with someone who is a prima donna, you know, or who
has ego,
doesn't know their place, you know, and that is something that, and that is a tricky balance for anyone who, you know, so you have to care very intensely about it and fight for your point of view. And on the other hand, you have to know the fact that you're not the director and that you, and that perhaps you are simply wrong. You know? So
that's true. Jacob, I wanted to watch Missing in Brooks County, but I can't. In Poland, I can't watch it.
I was able to watch it. It was very good. So I wanted to ask you some questions about that, which I thought were really interesting. It's kind of funny that we had talked about building relationships and stuff, because Peter and I had done an episode about just that thing, where we get that kind of, okay, well, what about this? You know, when people ask us stuff like, how do I get relationships, whatever, that you would talk about that. It's great to hear you talk about it, because you're kind of, I don't know, more legit than we are in regards to like the amount of how you've been doing this and whatever. So, but another thing that I wanted to ask you about in regards to Missing in Brooks County is that I thought this is something that we had talked about also, was the style of how editing has kind of changed over the years, not just in regards to like the technology of like, I mean, I started editing on 3/4 inch tape with a video toaster. And then once it got over to nonlinear editing, was like, oh my God, this is, game changing,
Yeah.
So in that same sense of things evolving with the onset of like so much media coming out right now, like so much content, and it not being just on like Amazon, but also on YouTube, and people who aren't necessarily video editors but they're, I don't know if they would become video editors, but they're essentially content creators, and how the style of editing has in the past, no-nos that we thought of, specifically like the jump cut, have now become like, oh, that's just like a thing that you see and nobody blinks an eye out of it. And so I wanted, maybe this is an elaborate buildup, but I thought it was very interesting within Missing in Brooks County. There's the interview with Dr. Kate Bradley, I think is her name. And she has, the one interview that she has where it's a close-up, it's like, that's the only time we see where it's like kind of those jump cut interviews. And so I was curious if you could like talk about that, where it was kind of the most, it was first of all like very different than any of the other interviews, just with the framing of it. But then the way that it was, the way that it was edited was also different. Can you talk about that, or how that came about?
This is such a great topic and just such a huge topic. The way that, and I love the elaborate buildup, because I think you're thinking along the same lines that I am, where in watching stuff these days, it's so interesting to see how things are changing. And yes, YouTube is having and has had an enormous impact on the way that non-YouTube things are cut, as one, for instance. And just to talk a little bit more about that, the big broad scope of that, in general, there's the pace of things continues to, in general, like, again, this is such an overgeneralization, but pacing, I think, continues to accelerate. And there is a study that's back there that I think is somewhat old, but at the time they were doing a 30-year span of, it might have been from the 80s, the 90s, and the aughts, or maybe it was the 70s, the 80s, and the 90s, and they took some cohort of films where they had some way of doing sort of an objective analysis, and they were looking at how many cuts per minute there were in films that they, Hollywood films or whatever, and you could see it was basically a straight line towards more cuts per minute, And so the audience, which is a huge overgeneralization, but a general audience in general is, like, our brains are tuned to accept information in a particular way at a particular moment in history. And so you can get away from that to some degree, but you have to understand the context you're in. Missing in Brooks County is a very, I would say, a pretty deliberately edited film. It has a pretty deliberate pacing. It does not move super fast. I don't think it's it's not a slow film. It's not and yet I think there are people who are used to a certain style of something that might find it a little pokey. So that was decided by, me and the two directors, and just comes by the way that you intuit how you're doing it, and then as you're tightening things up, how far you're going to go. But we felt that the content, to some degree, it seems like it should always inform the form. So, how does it feel? Should it be related to what it's about, and what the overall style of the thing is? And here, this was about a very large, vast space that was easy to get lost in, that has, where time just sort of, like years tick by. And so one of the major, goals was to try to put the audience in that space, and to let you feel like you actually spent time there and you felt what it was like to be there. And that means that you have to put people in verite scenes in what feels like real time. And of course, real time is, no matter how slow or fast you're doing it, it's always an illusion in editing. There is, but our version of that was one that we wanted to, you could take a breath. There are characters who take breaths. I think some of my favorite moments in it are silent moments or moments where pauses are taken. And so that was the general feeling for it. And then the part that you're referring to with Dr. Spradley, that was just it was easy to do. It was like, well, we need to get these, these are the three parts that have to, that we need in here, and there isn't a great cutaway to use, and why not? Why not? And so in a way it violates one thing that I try to give to my students a lot, which is, okay, well, you ought to, any film is going to set its own rules. It's going to tell you what the landscape is, and it's going to kind of set the rules and then play by them, right? And as you noted, I don't think that happens anywhere else in the film. So it's an anomaly, which in general I find distracting, right? The film is sort of set you up to expect one thing, and then it gives you something else. On the other hand, yes, like I think the fact that people are used to that makes that an easier sell. Plus, also, I've always found, like, to me, what's fascinating about jump cuts is that I still think, even given the fact that people are somewhat used to them, there's still a way to do them that feels really wrong. There's still a way to do them that feels very disruptive and feels arbitrary and feels kind of cheap, And then there's a way to do them that feels somehow more organic. And I think it usually has to do with the rhythm. You have to play it like it was a real sentence, like as if you have to play it as if it was one single clip, that it would be a perfect, like the cadence would be spot on. Or maybe actually what you're trying to do is, it's a film where you really are trying to accelerate things, and you're deliberately jumping, like you really want someone to sound very sort of, like caffeinated or something.
Yeah, right.
So there's almost endless permutations of how one could justify the particular editing of any given segment of a jump cutted part. But in that part, it's usually born out of necessity, right? We've decided these are but then I think there is a way to do it that is artful, and that in a way, like, it just, the editor and the directors, you all have to like it.
Right.
And then it has to have, by this point you've done so many rough cut screenings that you've definitely heard from people if that has been a troublesome thing, So if that is true, then you're going in with your eyes open, like, okay, well, some people aren't going to like this. In our case, nobody batted an eye with that stuff. So
yeah, it's probably a sign of the times, because you don't really see, I mean, as we pointed out, like YouTube is where you really see jump cuts, and mostly in talking heads like that. So I feel like maybe 5 years ago, if you had done that, people would be like with pitchforks and their torches. But because you kind of see it on the regular, it's just like, oh, this makes sense. And kind of how you said, like, there's continuity in that, where even though it's jarring, but it's not taking you out because you're focusing on what she said. And because, Missing in Brooks County is so compelling anyway, that even though that I noticed that, it was more like, oh, this is interesting, because seeing everything else, like, it's a different style. But I thought that was very interesting. And then to go back to another thing that you had mentioned was, obviously when you're sitting with directors and you're watching it over and over again, or you had mentioned that it was, everything about Brooks County was very, very deliberate. And so I wanted to ask you in regards to not just Brooks County, but also any other, the previous projects, because I know that you also have directed and produced, and because you've been making, as we all make our own films, which you direct and produce also, but within these larger projects, how involved are you within, I guess, the production before it reaches post? And the reason I'm asking this is because I thought it was very interesting, which a favorite section that really I thought was very powerful is in the beginning of the film, or closer to the beginning of the film, was establishing the man who went missing, Homero, and the texts between him and his mom. Mm-hmm. And then just that whole sequence was just like, kind of gave me goosebumps. So I was curious as to how deliberate like that was. And kind of going back to what you talked about when we talked about organizing, is like, are those things that are starting to like you're seeing like the twinkles of those ideas as you're going through the footage, or like is that something that okay, this is kind of, you figured out a structure and this is how you're sticking to it, you know what I mean, if that makes sense?
In that film there are two main stories that have sort of a narrative trajectory to them that we follow. So one of them is Homero's story, the other one is Juan's story, and there was a third story that for a long time was in the film. And in terms of editing, we were taking things into, so we had reels that were just character reels. So there was an Homero reel where we had all of the scenes with Homero, and we were playing around with what order we could put them in. And some of it was very obvious because things have a chronology, but we don't tell them in the film. We do jump back and forth some. But so on the basic level, we're just putting things in one character reel versus another character reel, and then watching it through without any, as if the movie was just about this one character. And then from there, we're going to figure out how is it that where do we pause? Where do we, what is present time, and then what is past? When do we make those changes and such? And with respect to that one section with the texts, if I'm not mistaken, I think that was Jeff Bemis's idea. So I worked with two co-directors on this, and then we all three produced it together. And one of those co-directors is my wife. We spend a lot of time with each other, both in our daily lives and in our film lives. So we had this sequence of Homero, and there was we had all these assets. We had material that, for lucky for us, his family, his extended family, especially his brother and sister-in-law, were quite eager participants and collaborators with us in making the film, and they had saved a tremendous amount of material from this thing that happened, a while before we ever met them, but when he first went missing. So they had saved all of their texts. They had saved all these recordings of calls they had with Border Patrol and with these coyotes. And so there was all of this material that they gave to us. And so we're just trying to think about how to put the audience back as if we're in real time, and we are that family who has their loved one go missing, and Homero goes missing. And so there were these texts, and just first reading them, like there's just this awful, it's just text on a page, but knowing what the outcome was, seeing these one-way texts where it's like, where are you? And then a very long pause, and then nothing comes back, and then another one out there. It was a simple question of how do we dramatize this, and I think it was just an idea that, well, let's put the text on the screen, and Jeff is kind of a whiz at, it's very simple animation, and then it was just about how much time do we wait in between those, and then how do we let the sound design in those moments, because we're using drone shots over places that are in Brooks County that he could have been, how do we let the sound design fill in these gaps, and how do we make you wait just long enough to feel uncomfortable, but not so long that you are getting annoyed, or that you don't understand the purpose of the pause,
Right.
So anyways, that's an example of something that was one person's idea. In any editing, in any post-production process, you're looking for ideas from here, there, and everywhere. And in general, you're just trying to find the best way that something can work. And the most important thing is that everyone who is part of the creative team can, either starts at or can arrive at a similar sensibility as to what the right thing to do is. You get real trouble if you have just basic fundamental disagreements about what is good, what works or what doesn't. And sometimes you have to try these things out. You have to go in this direction for a while and see how the film feels if you do it this way. And sometimes you do have to have those arguments so that you can get to that consensus, Luckily, I think we came to a pretty nice cohesion on that. And, the amount of time that we spent deciding exactly how much pause there should be until a particular music cue hits, we loved going over that kind of stuff. How long can we wait so that it's not telegraphing the action? It's not telling you something too obviously, but it's also still giving the needed emotion, So by the time we finished, we were all feeling very in sync about what the what the right, quote unquote, right thing to do would be at any given moment.
How do you deal with getting fresh perspective? Because like I think this is a struggle for every project that goes on for a long time, that after seeing like 20 versions of a film, you're losing fresh perspective. So how do you deal with it?
Well, that's just a given, and it's a given that every practitioner has to deal with. And I think it's just, what are your strategies for doing it, and how much experience do you have in doing that? I mean, I think one of the major qualities of an editor is the ability to somehow sit down, and watch something that you've seen for, this is the 147th time that you've seen it.
Yeah.
And to somehow bring yourself back to that place where you're a fresh viewer. You've never seen this before. What am I going to get out of it? What can I... And so that's a muscle that I think you can develop. I think I've gotten better at it over the years. I think that simply, you learning by doing, you do it again and again and again, and having, if you do that enough, where you go through these, periods of not being able to see it afresh, and then watching it with a test audience or with trusted friends or whatever, and having that experience of seeing it through someone else's eyes, that's a really important part. And that's why those screenings are important, to get those perspectives from other people. I think that helps you build the muscle of being able to do it even without the other people in the room. And then there are times where there's no way that you simply need an outside perspective. You need somebody who doesn't know it, because there's a limit to how much you can not know, willfully not know. You are going to be over familiar with it, So it's a combination of it's just a rigorous process of finding the right moments to share rough cuts, having those screenings in a way that solicits the very best feedback, and finding ways to be neutral and non-reactive. Sometimes you want to tell people why, like, no, you're wrong that you haven't liked it, but that's almost never true. That's almost never. You can't win an argument with an audience that way by trying to browbeat them into something that just isn't working. There's also things that I do where I will, even if I just have to push my chair a little further back from the screen, turn the sound up just a little bit more, turn a light off, just something that will physically change the way that I'm looking. I'm always trying to do it on full screen, any little thing that can break up facilitate that feeling of not knowing is helpful.
Being the audience member, get it. The thing that I often think about when thinking about documentaries is this concept of someone who actually does very long takes. I just always think about Werner Herzog and how he deals with his films. And, he talks a lot about this concept of ecstatic truth. And this is a super fascinating topic to me, because basically, he says that, let me actually quote him here. He says that ecstatic truth is mysterious and elusive, and can be reached only through fabrication and imagination and stylization. In your book, you say that, to determine if your film is still on the right side of ethics, so to speak, you should ask yourself a question: does this series of small lies tell a larger truth? But Werner Herzog, he sometimes takes it to extreme, I think. And I can't remember the title of the film, but in one of his films, he puts a quote from, I don't know, Albert Einstein, I think, on the screen that is totally fake. And and you don't know it's fake. You don't know if it's fake. You don't know it. You're done with the film. You don't know it. I just know it because I've seen in interview with him where he just said that he made it up. And so the question that I always ask myself is, how far is too far? Can you think of good examples where fabrication of the stylization, fabrication actually leads to something that is speaks a greater truth?
Well, I think the operative word within his phrase ecstatic truth is ecstatic. it's not truth.
Yeah.
It's the place where one feels emotionally something exciting, and something that feels true. It feels like you've been, like it's that ineffable thing where it hits you in a certain way. One way to talk about this is to think about it from the point of view of coming at it through fiction. There's there's this director, Barry Jenkins, who made Moonlight, and then he made his most recent thing was this series, The Underground Railroad. And he talked about in an interview how the Underground Railroad was it wasn't a literal railroad. It was a set of sort of relationships and connections that black people had, slaves had, of trying to find passage, safe passage in a dangerous world to try to escape.
Yep.
But he literalizes it in that, and I regret that I haven't seen that yet, because I've heard that it's amazing. But he talked in an interview about how there was, when he was growing up in school and he was learning about the Underground Railroad, he read about it in a textbook. He never really understood it until he read Beloved by Toni Morrison, which is this fiction book, right? But it's about slavery, and so for him, only coming at it through a fictional point of view did he really understand its, I guess you could say, its emotional core. It's, for him, he didn't understand the truth of it until he got at it through fiction. And so that's another way to sort of think about it, is what are we trying to convey to an audience, and how do we get there? I tend to feel in a documentary that, it's hard, because there are documentaries where I feel wrong about it. I feel that I have been tricked, and that somehow someone wasn't playing by the rules, and I react in the negative. There are other films that do that, and yet I feel ecstatic. I feel very excited, and I feel like there was something very something kind of amazing that got at that. There's The Act of Killing, the Joshua Oppenheimer film, where they are, using staged reenactments to try to get at some kind of emotional truth. And in that film, there's an arc with Anwar, who's this killer, admitted, genocidal killer, who is trying to explain these places where these things happened. And the arc of that film is that, at least the conceit of how it's shown, is that even someone like that has, there is something innate in humans that will eventually cause someone like that to reckon with their past. And so there's a scene at the end where he just starts retching. He starts like dry heaving, because he's there's just something emotionally that's coming to him about what he's done, and what even though he's talked very dispassionately about it before, sure, here was the place where we killed them, here's the place where we did that. There's something that happens through the process of having really gone through being the subject of the documentary and doing the reenactments that has brought him to this place where he can no longer, his physical body is starting to realize it, even though his brain hasn't yet, so that's the conceit in that film. So to me, if that felt very true to me. I would like to believe that is true, that there are not, even the most evil people we can imagine, there's something at the core of all of us humans that none of us can get beyond, right? So because I believe in that, I bought into that truth of that film, even though there's a lot of manipulation that it takes to get you there, it's so hard, because it's getting easier and easier to do a lot of, to fabricate a lot of these things. And what I fear is that people are getting more and more used to assuming that documentary is just another made up thing, that feels a little dangerous to me. And that's hard because I do think some of the most interesting stuff happens at the margins. You know, it happens, there's this film by the Ross brothers, Bloody Nose, Empty Pockets, from a couple years ago that showed at Sundance that purports to be the last night in a bar in Las Vegas. And it's all the regulars who are coming back, and it's a documentary. That's how it was. It's in the documentary category at Sundance. It's billed as a documentary, and it's just one long evening, a verite evening, shot with several cameras of the place is going to shut down. You can see there's all these regulars there, all these regular drinking folks, and it's just one long night there. And in fact, it was the only thing that was shot in Las Vegas was the exterior to the club. Like, it was actually shot outside of New Orleans. And in fact, what they did is they solicited barflies, like regulars, not at one bar, but at a whole host of bars around the area, and said, hey, come to this one for one night. We're going to shoot this thing. And then people kind of essentially, they sort of played themselves. They said, here's the general idea of what the idea is of what's happening. It's as if you're at your bar and it's the last night, and then they just shot the whole thing. So essentially there's like everything about the way that you're led to believe about what you're seeing is a lie. It's not in Las Vegas. These people don't actually, there's not one bar. It's an amalgam. But there are really, really great moments in that film. There are, moments that feel very, very emotionally true. And I think their justification would be that that's what they're going for. And if you, if you read up enough on it, like nobody's they didn't actually hide what their process was. As soon as you start getting interviews coming out, they're very frank about it. And if you look at the Sundance, the festival blurb very carefully, it's a very coy, like in so many words, they're telling you there's something that's made up about this. So part of it is that we have to take all of the extra filmic things into context. So no film ever actually exists just on its own. We always come into it having we've been brought there by something. There are things in the poster, there are things even in the title itself that give us clues. And I don't have any answers as to what's too far. It seems like so contingent in every, but I do, like any other audience member, I think I have a place where I feel right about some things and I feel wrong about others. And I feel like it's just something about have you gotten to that place in a way that feels like you've respected the audience in some fundamental way. I don't know.
Yeah. I love the examples you gave. Really good. Really good. Another thing I wanted to ask you about from your book, actually. So, I only edited one short documentary in my life. But the one I worked on, I really struggled with, with moving between, topics. So that's something that I really struggled with. It was a few years ago. I'm pretty sure that I would do a little bit better now, but but it doesn't matter. So you talk about this concept of hinge clips in your book. So kind of like thinking about, do you have other tips or strategies for, moving throughout the content, for moving throughout, the narrative of the film?
First of all, don't try to create the hinges too quickly. They don't mean any, like you won't know until you're relatively far along what you need. You won't know until you're relatively far along where the transition points might be. You won't know even like what these various things that you're coming back and forth between A, B, and C. Is it going to be between A, B, and C, or is it going to be between A, B, C, and D? Or is it just going to be between A and B? So you sort of have to do enough work to get the structure functioning in a way that is semi-coherent, at least. It's only at that point that you that you kind of need those things. And then it's sort of like it's this thing that I think editors get good at, of just trying to keep your awareness level up. So, and you're keeping your awareness level up about various things all at once. But one of them is just what could make an interesting transition. And so it's really sort of having those feelers up and going, oh, this is listen to how this, listen to how the end of this little interview bite goes. They go from here and then they go over there. Could we employ this? Could we, or it's a more manufactured thing where it's just a purely visual thing. There's something that I've written about there's a new book that I've just turned the manuscript in for. And there's a point in this film, Asif Kapadia film, Diego Maradona, which is about the Maradona, the footballer, very famous footballer. And there's a great, very simple little moment in that film, but I just think is extraordinarily well done, where there's all this archival stuff. He's at the top of his fame. He's playing for Napoli. He's playing in Naples, Italy. He's like the quotes in there are so great. Like basically Naples was like, quote unquote, the armpit of Italy. It's like the part of Italy where that just gets no respect, right? And so the fact that they had Maradona playing for them and they were winning, people were just going nuts. The Italians, they were just going nuts. There's a quote where they're like, almost everybody in town had a picture of him. A lot of them put it right next to Jesus. It was that level of adoration. And so you get this montage with audio clips like that, and it goes to this non-dialogue montage where you just see all these still frames, and he's getting his picture taken with these people and with those fans, these old people, these young people, it seems like everybody wants their picture taken with Maradona, right? Click, 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 click. And then there's one final click, and it's with a new guy. This one, pause is held a lot longer, and there's this very slow move in. And then there's this very, very subtle underscore music that comes in that's slightly ominous. And we are going away from Maradona and toward this other dude. And that's the hinge clip into, we're like, wait a second, I've seen this guy before. And it's been seeded like 15 minutes earlier that he came to Italy, and there's kind of a crime family that kind of runs things around there. And we've been introduced to this character, the main boss of this crime family, and we're like, oh my God, that's this dude, right? And then we go into that guy and we realize, Maradona has been palling around with mobsters, So, but it's a silent transition, because we go from everybody wants a piece of him, he's super famous. The mob people also want a piece of him, and he's gotten in with them, right? And and the transition happens purely visually. And that's the hinge clip is that one. It's that one of the picture of the two of them, because it connects to both of them. It's part of, yes, he's getting his picture taken with a bunch of people, but it's the first clip of this whole segment, which is about, I'm forgetting the name, Carmona, whatever his first name is, Carmona, and it's going to be about that, right? So, so who knows how they came up with that? But in a way, you have to know what the need is first, and then you can find your way to it. And it's no good if it's just it's super clever, but it's just showing off how you can do it, and it has to make sense with what's the next logical thing that we want to hear about. So it has to, really the more important thing in a way is what is the narrative flow, and then that's kind of that's the juicy, very important, but in a way it's kind of icing on the cake that leads you there in a way that feels more artful, and more subtle.
Beautiful. So I'd like to ask editors about how they stay productive and efficient in their editing way. So do you have tactics for that you use in your editing sessions? It's
a great question, because I think it's very hard these days. The calls for our attention are real. It's
endless.
The whole the whole social media world is built on attention, and it's our attention that they make their money off of. So they find and there's just so much out there that one could look at. So I feel like in some ways am not successful at this. Depending on what's going on with the news, I may be checking in with, various things several times an hour, little tiny little, or just that I'm going to check my email, So I will start simply by admitting a certain amount of defeat, that, just to, I'm only so successful at this. But the strategies I have, I it's, it's kind of simple. Like what is the time that I can actually just carve out, like I need to not have anybody need me between, these hours, and I need to have some, one way or another, some distance, even if it's not physical distance. I'm just in the basement, but nobody's expecting me to be anywhere. I don't have to check the email. I don't, so I think it's really about carving those times out. And then I think paying attention to your own rhythms. So for instance, I'm definitely a morning person. I've only grown, I used to, get a lot done editing late into the night, but as I've gotten older, that doesn't work for me anymore. And I don't think it ever worked that well to begin with, so like, I know that I have better ideas. I'm more productive in the earlier hours of the day, and I might as well just knock off at 4 o'clock, because I don't think I'm going to come up with anything great after then anyways, so it's just like, arranging your life around what your natural proclivities are, and when you're maybe at your best is another part. I mean, there are these apps out there that will forcibly, restrict you theoretically from internet access for a certain amount of time, but you can always just go and undo it. It's like, so it's, it's like whatever works. But I still do very much believe in the idea that you need solitary time to be with yourself and your own thoughts. And you really do need time to do that without other people around in the project, like, because the best work will come from people being able to come to conclusions individually and then share them collectively. So every editor has probably had situations where they've just felt like the director has been on top of them. There's been no space to have them to have their own private imagination about things. And I've definitely been in that situation before. And somehow there's something about the autonomy of silence and the autonomy of aloneness that is necessary, even if it's not sufficient. Like, you also very much need the collaboration and all the other ideas and other people to tell you that your ideas aren't working,
One of the biggest problems of young generation is that they don't have time to be bored, right? And it has been proven that, the most creative work actually happens when you're bored, when you allow yourself to be bored. Yeah, I'm fascinated with, like, this concept of productivity, and, I'm guilty of that as well. I'm defeated like daily.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I think, like, I think many people do not recognize how important it is to hone on that skill of, staying focused and, carving, as you said, carving out, a period of a day where you just, don't allow anything else to distract you from the work that you do.
Editing is a commonplace. It's not, but editing is an exploration. It's always an exploration, and you don't really know whether something is going to work until you go and try to put it together, and you kind of play it out a little bit. And so you really do need to, like, sort of, in order to think something through, you have to actually put it into, you have to put it into action. You have to build that idea of a part of a sequence or in order to see whether the thing that was the idea, whether it has any merit, or whether, it on its own didn't have merit, but the thing that it brought you to was the good idea, So, so you need that time to just play out the idea and figure out what the best version of it is, and every editor has their own compass as to how long that's going to take. Like, you do get, like, I can look at something and go, okay, this is probably going to take me about 45 minutes to figure out, to sort of build it and decide for myself whether it's worth pursuing beyond that, or this is going to take X amount of time, or that's going to take this amount of time. But you need that time in order to do it, in order to even to just get to the point where you can decide, okay, we're not going to pursue that. Right. But you wouldn't know, it would have been, if you don't do that, then you've got several unexplored avenues, some of which would have been the right thing to do, so you need all of those false starts. You need all of that exploration in order to get to where the good ideas are. And as I think Jeff Richmond says somewhere in the book, you need the bad ideas to get to the good ideas. I'm paraphrasing, but a lot of times you never really know where something really cool is going to come from. And sometimes it comes at the end of 3 hours of absolute torture, of something that just, was not fun at all and didn't work,
Do you have like your personal, I don't know, career struggles, connected to editing?
I've chosen to have kind of a dual career. So, I'm an academic and I'm an editor.
Yeah.
And that has been a wonderful, very fortunate thing for me. But it's not without its compromises. There have been times when there were projects that I've really wanted to work on that I essentially just couldn't because my academic career demanded certain things of me. If you're a full-time teacher, there's, I've chosen to have that arrangement, and I've gotten to work on great projects despite it. But there was a project recently that I am sure is going to be just a friggin' fantastic film. And I had a very long 2 hour plus conversation with the director, followed by another, we went very deep into the possibility of me editing this film. And in the end, she concluded that the way that I was going to have to do it, like when it was the schedule on which we would edit it, just wasn't going to work for her. And that, I actually was, when she made that determination, I was actually glad that she did that, because it would have made, even with that schedule, I would have been more busy than I would want to be, and so in a way, like, the hard thing got done for me. But still, that's too bad, because that's a project that I would have loved to have been on, just because I saw the potential in the raw material, and I really liked her so much and what she seemed to be trying to do with the film. So that's something that's like, I wouldn't trade it though. Like, I think I've just gotten so much out of having. Just, I think being able to teach is it's a gift. It's an honor. It's hard, but it's really, really rewarding. Getting to, and it really brings you back to some of the more simple joys of this process, because you get to be with people for whom a lot of this stuff is brand new. We all get, after enough years and enough struggles with our own careers or the way the business works or whatever, I think a lot of us are, even if we don't know it, we're somewhat jaded. But when you're dealing with students all day long who are just like thrilled, like you wouldn't believe that something is working in their film, you're like, it's amazing to be around that. So I guess that's maybe the one thing about my career that is very specific to me, that is a minor struggle. But again, like, I've been fortunate to have situations that have allowed me to continue working on really interesting projects at various times.
So with that idea of you being a teacher and seeing like this new generation, kind of introducing this new generation of editors, in your opinion, I guess, what do you think are the most important qualities to a great documentary editor?
I think tenacity. There's commitment, tenacity. I think you have to love. I don't know. I might be just generalizing from what I love about editing to overgeneralizing it for anyone, but but I think one of the greatest joys of any editor is finding a piece of material that never really had life to it before, and you've finally found it. It's found its home within the film. It's either like a part of a scene that wasn't working that is now is like an electric, brilliant, wonderfully emotive part of a scene, or it's a scene that never really had much meaning or excitement, and now it's in a place where it's full of meaning and excitement. So it's I think just a drive to find those moments. Like that's what gets me up in the morning. It's like, where is everything going to find its home? and humility. It's this weird combination of ego and humility. Because I do think you need a certain amount of again, independent thought, independent, like, I know how this can work. What if it worked like this, or, and also like I know how this can feel. I know how we can make this have a certain rhythm, and that takes a certain amount of ego and of very specific individual thought. And then the humility part is the fact that just that it's going to take a lot of work to find the stuff that actually stays in the film. And that thing which is no longer so painful to me, but I know earlier in my career, coming to rough cuts where I was, just completely convinced that we were almost done or whatever, and you have a crickets, like that. So that, I don't know, what is that? That's is that like sadomasochism or is that just it's, you have to be willing to go to those places and to come back from them, good sense of humor. I think any edit with a certain number of people after a while develops a certain gallows humor related to the topic, because you've been through a lot together, and nobody else would possibly make these jokes about the real lives that are going on screen, because it would be wrong, but because you have been there, like you're forced into that role. And creativity, of course. And then, I think most editors have some love of process, of just like, for instance, I don't know, I love making little spreadsheets for my work where it's like, and then there's certain tasks where I can like put it all in green, meaning that I've finished it, and then the next one is, things like that, where you're like, this is again, the sifting process or the whatever, where you take a certain amount of pride in just having actually just completed the work in an organized fashion, and being able to have put things in a way where you can find things quickly, and to a lot of people that's understandably like really dull, so I think you have to have a certain amount of even if a lot of that is assistant editing duties, I still think a good editor has at least some pride in just that pure process organizational stuff.
Yeah, I agree. That's kind of the problem solving aspect of it. Anytime I think of editing, or the thing that draws me to editing, or when I explain it to people, is my love of the problem solving. Is kind of like how you said before, like kind of finding that diamond in the rough and giving it purpose. And it's the same, like, because for me, every time I start on a new project, I'm always anxious about it, because there's that kind of that idea of I can't even think of the concept. We're always talking about it, where the imposter syndrome. Yeah. Like someone's gonna know that I'm not worth it. This is I know that there's a problem here, and it's gonna get too far away from me. I won't be able to grab it. But then having that moment where then it clicks, whether that be within like, okay, I'm looking at a mountain of footage, and I need to get through it and like organize it in a way that then it becomes like that's one problem, and then after that it's just a constant set of solving problems, and then to go along with like crossing those off the list. I've completed it. I'm accomplished and stuff. So it's all that stuff for sure. It rings true. So true. And
then I think also I think a certain love of collaboration has to be there, where because you're not gonna the editor doesn't get a ton of glory in general, you're not most people don't know the names of the editors, you're not
either.
you're not a household name, even though, you were a completely integral part of why the movie works, so you have to be okay with that. And I think I'm only okay with it when I am in when I feel like I'm working with people who it's them that I'm performing for, it's that, like they know why, right? Yeah. They know how certain things came to be, how they were, and even if there's only a few of those examples ever mentioned in an interview or whatever, that's between you and them, and that's what your professional pride comes from, Yeah. So, for instance, I don't know why I'm choosing this super old example, but on Lost in La Mancha, I mean, we won the Daily Telegraph in London gave it the Peter Sellers Award for Best Comedy of the year, which is, and it's a documentary, and if it's a comedy, it's a very dark comedy, but there are definitely comedic elements to it. Part of that is made possible by Miriam Cutler's score, which is whimsical in some ways, but not to toot my horn too much, but a fair amount of it is possible because of what I brought to it in the editing. And there were sequences that we knew were going to be interesting scenes, but it was only once I put them together and showed them to Keith and Lou, who just bust out laughing. They were like, "Oh my God, I had no idea this was going to be so entertaining." Where there's there are just various scenes where it's a story of like anything that can go wrong in this production goes wrong, and it's just it's this horrible tragedy playing out before your eyes, but the stakes are low. It's just a film, so yes, you can, and it's also it's about Terry Gilliam's film about Don Quixote not getting made. He eventually, a decade and a half later or so, did finish it, but there are scenes where like they're out there in the middle of the desert in were they in Andalusia? Anyways, they're in Spain. And, like one thing after another has conspired against them being able to just shoot this damn scene. And there they are. Johnny Depp's there. He's ready for his take. It's all going well. And then there are these fighter jets that just blow over it's like it's impossible, like just these Mach 2, whatever, where like they can't record sound, like they can't do any dialogue now, right? And you just have all these people who they're just all one after another. They all just look up at the sky. And it becomes this moment of like, what now, right? So there are various moments in that film where, like, you had to have the intuition, right? You had to have the feeling like, okay, there's something latent here. There's something that's here that like, it's only funny because we took it out of context and we put it together. But there's something very true about the emotional experience of it for the people who are there, who lived through it, that makes it real. You're just kind of like, you're taking something and you're grabbing its pure essence. It's like, it's the little drops, where you've distilled down the juice into the most bitter, potent form of it. Where like that, like that's the thing that I think, those little moments where like, you saw the potential, and therefore you just for yourself can take some pride in it, and that you had that little important part of it, even though there were other things that you tried to do that didn't work, and but you were you made it through without getting too upset about those.
Do you have your own favorite editing book or filmmaking book, except your own, of course?
The two books that I take excerpts from in my editing class are Walter Murch's In the Blink of an Eye, which is maybe the...
We made the video about this one as well.
It's one of the most cited books. And then there's this film by the director and editor Edward Dmytryk called On Film Editing that I also like. It's from like 83 or something. It's from the early 80s. And a lot of it is somewhat dated, clearly, because technology has changed so much. But there are certain principles in that, and that's not about documentary editing. But there are concepts that he's getting at there that I think are strong. There are loads of different little articles about documentaries that I bring in that are not really about editing per se, but are about breaking down what's the underlying logic of any given film that I just love. I just came across this author, Sandy Flitterman Lewis, who turns out is a Facebook friend of a former student of mine, and her name came up, and she was criticizing, David Bogdanovich just died the other day, and I put in an unkind comment about him that I wasn't endorsing the comment, but I was saying that someone else made it, and she was criticizing me for it, and I was like, Sandy Flitterman Lewis, oh my God. Anyways, she wrote this great article on this film, Night and Fog, which is this Holocaust film from the 50s. And, like when people can take their intellectual powers and look at a film and kind of make you look at it in a new way and think about why it works the way that it does. She talks about how the past and the present are used in that film in very interesting ways. So different individual articles that where I think someone has had a really interesting take on something that by reading it you can think about something in a way that you didn't before. And oftentimes it's not really about the editing per se, but it is about, I do tend to be attracted to things that are about structure, which by its nature is about editing.
Yeah, sure. And unless Ricky has some other questions, I just wanted to ask you what's next for you. What are you working on right now, and where can people follow your work?
Well, I've just turned in the manuscript for a new book. It's called How Documentaries Work, and it will be published in 2022, probably late summer, by Oxford University Press. And it is so the book that we're talking about today is a textbook. It's a how-to book that leads you step by step through the process. This one is not that, but it's more of a think piece, but it goes through lots of individual aspects of documentaries and thinks them through with lots of quotes from practitioners. And so it's a little more heady, but there's a lot of, as with this book, there are a lot of very specific examples. And I sort of tried to tease out, all right, well, what are a lot of the common conventions in documentary? How can we think about how these conventions work, and how can we kind of bring them to the surface a little bit? This is stuff that you probably somewhere in your brain kind of have noticed this, but you maybe haven't thought about it in that way before. So anyways, that has been my major project for the last year plus. I have a couple of editing projects that may be the next thing for me that I'm not quite sure about yet. But the first, and then I am also writing a second edition of this book.
Really?
Apparently there are people who really want to, one thing that's been in demand is a chapter on short documentaries, specifically.
Oh yeah,
and
I love that actually as well. So,
well,
I'll have to buy another one. Okay, that's good.
I'm in the same boat because I don't know what I'm going to write yet. So, because I instruct students on making them all the time, but I haven't done a lot of thinking yet about what I can say specifically about shorts that isn't also applicable to longer form documentary work. So I'm going to have to figure that out. So those are things that I'm working on. And you can, I do have a website, jacobbricca.com. If you Google me, you'll find the films that I've worked on and the book and now books soon that I've written.
Well, thanks so much, Jacob, for your time. Hopefully we can
Thank you.
Have you back on the podcast for when any of your new books come out.
Well, thank you. It's a genuine pleasure to chat with you guys who clearly are thinking about all this stuff in a substantive and interested way. I really enjoyed it.
Okay, so that's it for today. I really have to tell you that after reading the book. It made me want to edit a documentary. So I might, start working on one myself if I have to, if no opportunities come my way.
I completely agree. I mean, I've done a number of documentaries myself already, and so talking to Jacob was like super inspiring. And I mean, he's done over 12 documentaries that I know of, at least, with his latest being Missing in Brooks County. Which if anybody's listening to this right now, I highly suggest that you check out. So I hope you enjoyed the episode today, folks.
Yeah.
And
until the next time, shoot and edit like there is no tomorrow. Thanks for taking time out of your busy day.
If you like what you've heard, please rate, review, and subscribe on whatever podcast platform you've listened to this on. Your reviews help more people discover this show. You can also follow us on Instagram. Just search for @CutToReveal and tell your friends.
And if you have any questions or comments, send them to podcast@cuttothepoint.com. And who knows, maybe we'll use them in the future episodes. And as we say around here, until the next time, shoot and edit like there is no tomorrow.